This video is made possible by donations to the United States Lighthouse Society from people like you. Again, thank you all for attending this event. I see a lot of friends here, a lot of familiar faces and names. As I sometimes say, the usual suspects, and I mean that in the best possible way. So thank you all for taking part in this. This is going to be a great event. Been looking forward to it for quite a while now. This is a little different from the events we usually do. Those of you who've attended a lot of them know that they're usually about lighthouses. I guess that's pretty obvious. We are the U.S. Lighthouse Society, so most events kind of, involve lighthouses in one way or another. This is a little different, but it does obviously involve the Coast Guard, which is certainly, the Coast Guard is very much a central part of the history of lighthouses as well. And one of the central characters in this rescue story we're going to be talking about was Bernie Weber, the coxswain of the Coast Guard 36500. And Bernie had experience as a lighthouse keeper and lightship crewman as well. I'm going to tell you about that in a couple of minutes. Tonight, we will be hearing about one of the most famous rescue stories in Coast Guard history, and we'll hear about the amazing rescue of the boat itself that was used in that rescue. If you read the book, The Finest Hours, you know quite a bit about this already. If you saw the movie, The Finest Hours, you were entertained, but you didn't necessarily get the facts of what really happened that night in 1952. Maybe some of the basic facts, but not all of it was exactly accurate. This event is being recorded and will be on the USLHS YouTube channel within a few days, possibly as soon as tomorrow. And we encourage you to share that with friends once it's posted. If you want to post it on social media or whatever, the more sharing, the better. We are going to do a Q&A, some Q&A at the end today after the presentation. And you can enter your questions in the chat, but we won't read them until the end, but feel free to ask any questions in the chat. You can enter them at any point. So at this point, I'm going to introduce our speakers today. First, I want to introduce my friend Judy Ann Point, who is the first vice president of the American Lighthouse Foundation. I think there are some people in the room who attended the American Lighthouse Foundation's annual gala in Kennebunkport, Maine, just a couple of days ago. Excuse me. And Judy Ann was basically the mistress of ceremonies at that, did a great job. So some of you know Judy Ann. She's also an winning volunteer for the Friends of Palm Rocks Lighthouse in Rhode Island, and also occasional co-host of the podcast I do for the U.S. Lighthouse Society. Which reminds me, I haven't said, for people who don't know me, I'm Jeremy D'Entremont. I'm the historian for the U.S. Lighthouse Society and host of the podcast Lighthearted. So Judy Ann, you actually had a lot to do with this whole event coming about. And I don't know if you'd like to say something about that, about what led to where we are tonight with this.
Yeah, I'll just take a minute. For this podcast, I remember last year I had reached out to all of the lighthouses in Southern New England because I wanted to get some information, some news that I could share on the podcast. So I heard back from a lot of the lighthouses, and one in particular, Chatham, reached out to me, and it was Flotilla Staff Officer Duncan Rushworth. And he was telling me about different things what going on, and he mentioned something about the motor lifeboat CG36500, that they take school tours on it. And I immediately froze, and I sent him back an email, and I said, "You mean that boat still exists?" I couldn't believe it. So a good friend had told me about that boat. It was Dennis Tardif, who was also at Palm Rocks, and he was the last lightkeeper, Coast Guard lightkeeper at Palm, and he knew the whole story and told me about it. So after I learned that the boat still existed, I knew I had to look into it some more. So another friend from Connecticut, Ken Mala, said, "Wait a minute, I have been on that boat. I took a tour and we actually took a ride in it. I said, "You're kidding me. You can actually get on the boat." So he gave me the contact information. I think, Johnny, you were the one that got back to me. We arranged a trip. There were six of us. It was myself, my husband, Gary, Dennis, his wife, Yamel, and our good friends, Nancy and Alan Sass. And I have to tell you that Captain Lee Marshaldon and the guide, John Norton, treated us like royalty. They were absolutely amazing. It was the perfect August day, and we even each got a chance to pilot the boat. And the fact that I was able to touch history, I mean, it gives me chills now just thinking about it. So, yeah, Jeremy, I thought this was a good idea for a podcast, but you turned it into a party. So here we are.
Well, we're all in this together. We're a team. We're cohorts on this. So thank you so much, Judy Ann, for
Mhm.
getting the ball rolling on
Oh,
all
love
this,
it.
for being part of it tonight as well. So I realize that both Jay and Johnny, we've been talking quite a bit. We've had two or three Zoom meetings leading up to this, but I'm not 100% sure how to pronounce either of your last names. So the first thing I'm going to say is, Jay, say your last name for me.
It's Stradell.
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 Okay. I might have said Stradal, and I'm sure you've heard that before, but
Yeah, yeah.
Stradell is correct. Okay. Well, I'm glad I asked that. So Jay is the chairman of the Orleans Historical Society on Cape Cod. The society owns the motor lifeboat CG36500, and Jay is very involved in the exciting plans you're going to be hearing about. Jay, you told me you've been a member of the board of directors of the society for 11 years. You've been the chair since 2020, and that you retired to the Cape in 2006 after a 32-year career at Verizon as a corporate communications executive. And Jay, something else I saw in you when I was Googling you was that you're also a railroad enthusiast and modeler.
Guilty
All
as
right.
charged.
Okay. Well, that's pretty cool. A lot of people love lighthouses, love trains as well. So, Jay, I don't know if you want to say anything just by way of introduction at this point. We're going to get into the presentation and just to.
Sure. No, I thank you very much, Jeremy and Judy Ann, for inviting us onto your podcast tonight. We're looking forward to telling everybody about our story. And just for you to know, I've got a lighthouse on my model railroad layout. So there you go.
All right. By the way, I don't mean to, it doesn't matter really. It's just semantics, but technically I don't consider this part of the podcast. The podcast is mostly just audio. This is basically a special event, a special virtual event, but it doesn't matter. You can call it a podcast. So I'll shut up about that. So Johnny, and again, same thing as I said to Jay, I'm not 100% sure how to pronounce your last name. So could you, Johnny, just say your last name for me?
Yeah, my name is Johnny Sinopoli.
That's kind of what I would have said. So, Johnny, thank you so much for being here. And you're a volunteer for the Orleans Historical Society and a member of the operations management team for the vessel. Is that accurate?
Yes, it is. That is accurate. Yes, I've been aboard for about 10 years. And it came after I read the book, The Finest Hours, and there was a panel discussion. And during the panel discussion, I heard them say, gee, if you'd like to come out and help us work on the boat next spring, we'd love to have you. And I asked, do you mean the boat? And they said, yes, the boat. So I went out, worked on it, scraped paint, and put it together that particular spring. And of course, I had to see it in the water. And then after I saw it in the water, I was completely into it, completely immersed. So that's been 10 years.
Yeah, completely immersed in the water. That's a little interesting use of words there, but that's great. And I've seen rehearsals of this presentation you're about to do, so this is great. You're going to be kind of doing a tag team kind of presentation here in just a moment. So at this point, I think we're ready to go into screen sharing, and I'm actually going to talk for a couple more minutes about Bernie Weber and his lighthouse experience. So just bear with me while I go into screen sharing. Okay, can somebody confirm you're seeing my screen at this point? It should be full screen. Judy Ann or Jay or John?
Yep, I can see it.
Okay,
You're good.
excellent. Just want to make sure before I start talking. So this is the boat, of course, the 36500. We're going to hear a lot more about this in just a couple of minutes here, but let me just give you a little background on Bernie Weber, who was the coxswain on the boat, and portrayed by Chris Pine in the movie, for those of you who saw that. But Bernie, and here's a picture of his book here, the book cover. The information I'm about to say, that talks about his lighthouse experience comes from this book. This was a self-published book, I think, about 10 or 15 years ago, and it really has a lot of information about lightships. If you're interested in lightships, it's a good book to read. It's got a lot of his own experience, but it's got a lot of lighthouse and lightship history as well. So Bernie Weber was from Milton, Massachusetts. He went to sea for more than 45 years as a Sea Scout in the U.S. Maritime Service and the Merchant Marine and in the Coast Guard. He served in the Coast Guard for more than 20 years on cutters, lightships, lighthouses, and lifeboat stations. Before we learn more about his famous rescue, I just want to tell you a little bit more about his lighthouse and lightship experience. So this is Highland Light, North Truro on Cape Cod. Excuse me. When he first joined the Coast Guard in April 1946, he became one of the Coast Guard keepers at Highland Light. And the Coast Guard has often referred to this as Cape Cod Light. It was his first assignment, as I said, and his pay was $66 a month. William Joseph, a veteran keeper in the Civilian Lighthouse Service and in the Coast Guard, was in charge. And Bernie had 6 hours on watch, alternating with 6 hours off, meaning he was working 12 hours a day. For a while, there was no room in the keeper's house, and Bernie's quarters were in a small building known as the Compass Shack, 8 feet by 8 feet, with no insulation and windows on all sides, and no curtains. There was an electrical outlet that hung from the ceiling, and no water, heat, or curtains or window shades. He was given a small cot to sleep on. There was no bathroom, and Bernie had to use a spigot outside the keeper's house to wash up. He wrote in the book that his diet consisted of peanut butter sandwiches, canned soup and beans, and cups of Nescafe. He and one other crewman would sometimes dig for clams to make sea clam pie. Finally, they let him live in the Highland Lifeboat Station about a mile from the lighthouse, and he would sometimes have to walk back and forth in total dark between the two places along the cliff there. And more than once, he actually slipped and fell down the embankment to the beach. Eventually, he got a bicycle to go back and forth, but he had to dodge deer, skunks, and porcupines in the middle of the night as he was going back and forth. So again, this is all from his book, and there's more besides this. So then he went to Gay Headlight, 1947, at the western end of Martha's Vineyard. He lived at the Gay Head Lifeboat Station near the lighthouse. His boss was Frank Greeter, who's the man on the right in this picture. The other man is not Bernie Weber. It's an assistant keeper. I'm not sure who he was, but Frank Greeter is on the right. He was the head keeper when Bernie was there. He was a veteran of the Lighthouse Service. I actually interviewed Frank Greeter's son, Bill Greeter, about 25 years ago on Nantucket. At Gay Head, Bernie learned to maintain a first-order Fresnel lens that's now on display at the Martha's Vineyard Museum. He wrote that he earned the trust of Frank Greeter, and because of that, he was allowed to use Greeter's workshop and to have access to all the spare parts for the lighthouse. And one of the other things he remembered was the fantastic chicken stew and blueberry pie that Frank's wife, Elsie Greeter, would make. So in 1958, Bernie was based at the Coast Guard station in Southwest Harbor, Maine. He asked for a transfer so he could be closer to a terminally ill family member, and they assigned him to the Nantucket Lightship, which was the LV-112 at that time. When he arrived on the lightship, the crew wanted to know what he had done wrong to deserve the assignment. Bernie spent 25 months on the LV-112 between 1958 and 60. For a while, he served as the interim captain, and he said the lightship duty was basically a love-hate relationship. He actually mostly loved it. A lot of the guys really hated it. It was like endless hours of boredom interrupted by moments of sheer terror and storms or boat collisions and that kind of thing. There's a lot in Bernie's book, by the way, about Ken Black. I'm sure some of you who are here know who Ken Black was. He was known as Mr. Lighthouse. He founded the Maine Lighthouse Museum. He was actually a lightship commander early in his Coast Guard career, and he and Bernie were friends. Bernie also served a few months in 1963 on the LV-102 on the Cross Rip Station between Martha's Vineyard and Nantucket. So just one more lighthouse story here. This is Nauset Light, excuse me, in Eastham on the Cape. For a while, when Bernie was assigned to Chatham Coast Guard Station, they had the kind of added duty of operating Nauset Lighthouse. On a cold night in January 1960, he got a call saying that Nauset Light was extinguished. So he took the station's truck, he drove alone over icy roads, and he got to Nauset Light at 1 a.m. He got the light working again, but in those days, the fourth order Fresnel lens rotated on a bed of mercury. Makes a really good bearing. Bernie accidentally dropped a vial of mercury and it smashed, and the mercury ran down the stairs. He tried to sweep it up, but it was impossible, if you know what mercury is like. I kind of chased it around, and then for several days he returned with a crew from Chatham to clean up the evasive mercury. So they all chased it around and around until they finally got it all. It did the best they could anyway. So that's just kind of a recap of Bernie's lighthouse and lightship experience. Again, if you pick up his book, you can read a lot more about it. So at this point, I believe, Johnny, if you want to pick things up, it's all yours.
Sure, I'll be happy to take it over. Today I'm going to be telling you about the rescue at sea of 32 crewmen from the SS Pendleton, which was due to a strong storm that took place back in February on the 18th in 1952. Actually, the storm set the stage for two tankers, two T2 oil tankers called the Fort Mercer and the SS Pendleton, to break apart on the same day. They actually broke up within hours of each other. But I'm only going to be focusing upon the rescue of the Pendleton crew, which was called back then the greatest small boat rescue in Coast Guard history, and that label remains to this very day. But before I get really into it, I know that we have a wide audience gathered here, some who are well-versed in the events of February 1852, and some who only know the basics of the story. So beyond today's presentation, I recommend that additional sources of information be referred to. The book, The Finest Hours, which Jeremy pointed out, by Michael Tugas and Casey Sherman, is a good one, very good, factual. The Disney movie, less factual. Two Tankers Down, by a person by the name of Robert Frump. Chatham, The Lifeboat Men, by Bernie Weber himself. So these are some good accounts of the event. The movie was quite good. It showed the basic story, but there were some alterations. It was a Disney movie, and some of the actual events that took place that night were not depicted, and some of the things you saw in the movie never happened. So additionally, this is important, I think, to our listeners. By going to the Orleans Historical Society's website, there are links to newspapers from the days following the incident, from February 19th through February 24th. I personally like these news accounts because they include survivor testimony with rich details, including, you're not going to believe it, safety equipment failures that named the flares and the bottom rung of the Jacob's Ladder, just for example. So the survivor's testimony just adds some great detail. But in the time we have together, I'm not going to be able to tell you every detail of the story. What I hope to do is inspire you to do more research on your own so that you can learn the inner details of what happened that night. I've spent years focused on 12 years from one particular day that happened 72 years ago, and I'm still learning things. So I encourage you to look at the options for learning and to continue your study of the event. So here we are, back in the morning now of February 18th. The map that you're looking at right now shows Cape Cod. You can see where Provincetown is. You can see the location of Pendleton. You can see the Fort Mercer offshore. Roughly, Fort Mercer is roughly 25 miles out to sea. Out there, by Coast Guard equipment, the seas were 40 feet and greater. Heavy seas, heavy swell was the wording that was in the Coast Guard report. But again, I'm not going to talk too much about the Fort Mercer. I am going to focus upon the SS Pendleton. So many of you know that the T2 tankers were carrying oil. One thing you're not going to hear, because we haven't found any details about it at all, is how much oil spilled and where that oil went and what the cleanup was after the fact. So I'm sorry, I'm not going to be able to talk about that environmental concern tonight. So you might ask, why did ships break? I mean, they're made of steel, aren't they? These ships were made of steel. They're not wooden at all. They're steel ships. And they were constructed hastily during World War II with the available materials. Remember that many ships, hundreds of ships, had been sunk during World War II in the first years of World War II. So they needed tankers to replace those that were lost at sea because of the German torpedoes. So we had an alchemist who came to the boat one day, and he was telling that the mixture of steel was not really the proper mixture. There was actually too much sulfur, and it created a flaw. It was labeled dirty steel, and so that dirty steel made the metal very brittle in cold water. The water temperature in that time of year, February, off New England, when this accident occurred, was about 43 to 45 degrees Fahrenheit. So the brittle metal combined with the heavy seas caused the breakup of the two separate vessels. The seas were heavy, as I said. The vessel was pitching and rolling. But to complicate matters, to make things worse, the ship was found to have been improperly loaded down in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. This came out in the survivor's testimony, one of those fun facts. The Coast Guard Board of Investigation concluded that the low temperatures on 2/18/52 tended to increase what they call notch sensitivity of the Pendleton steel, and that resulted in the brittle fractures. So the condition of loading and ballasting and excessive buoyance in the bow and stern and heavyweight midship created a sagging effect, which was aggravated by the extremely heavy seas. So, and then there's another detail, by the way. Back in 1951, July of 1951, so just a few months before this incident occurred, the SS Pendleton ran aground in the Hudson River. And where did it hit? It hit the 7 and 8 hold, which is exactly where she broke up the night of this incident. Or I should say the day of this incident. So now I just want to talk to you a little bit about the drift. The event actually happened about, say, 5:50 in the morning, 5:50 in the morning. And the captain, the master of the ship, Captain Fitzgerald, knew that there was going to be a storm. He decided to lay out of the shipping lanes heading into Boston. He remained east of Cape Cod. So the position that you see there is approximately that of 6 a.m. on the morning of February 18. So ship breaks in half. We have survivor's testimony, not survivor's testimony, survivor's story delivered to his daughter. And she said that her name was Renee Steele, talking about her dad, Ray Steele. She said her daddy had just gotten off duty and that he went down to his hammock to get some sleep, and he heard a loud bang. He didn't know what it was, but he grabbed as many clothes as he could, including a long black raincoat, and went topside. So Ray Steele knew something bad had happened, and when he got up to the top, they found out that the ship was in two pieces. So the ship was in two pieces. Here's what happened. The bow went in one direction, the stern went in another direction. The bow had the radio room, but no electricity. The stern had electricity, but no radio room. So for 12 hours, the crew aboard the stern section had no way to get off a signal. By the way, in the bow, there was the captain and 7. All souls were lost. So 8 members died just in the bow section. On the stern section, there were 32 who were saved. 1 was lost at sea. So you're watching all day long now. The wind was northeast. For those of you in New England, you know what a northeaster is. For those from around the country who don't know what a northeaster is, the winds just build over a great fetch. There's nothing to the east of Cape Cod until you get to France and the rest of Europe. So there's a long fetch, and the winds that would probably have been within, say, 100 miles of the coastline, that storm would have been no more than 100 miles out to sea, but it sets the seas up, blowing from northeast to southwest. A little bit later in the story, you'll see why that was important. So at this particular point, I'm just going to talk a little bit about the timeline for the day. As the day went on, the afternoon, maybe about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, radar, which had been down, came back up. So radar in Chatham, if you look just north of the final location of where the Pendleton lay, you see a red X down there. Just north of there is Chatham, and the Chatham Coast Guard station is right in there. Anyway, radar had been down for the day, and about 14:15 or so, 14:15 meaning 2:15 in the afternoon, there was a target identified, and they're like, what in the world is this? The Fort Mercer is way over here to the east. What could this target be? So they had an aircraft which had been flying over the Fort Mercer. And by the way, don't ask me how an aircraft was flying with such low ceiling and such poor visibility in such a storm. There's no detail about that I've ever learned. Anyway, the flight comes over, and he determines that there now are 2 ships in the water with 4 hulls that required rescues. So the day is moving along. Visibility is starting to lift. It's now about 2:30, 2:45 in the afternoon, and the visibility improves. In fact, it improved to 4 miles, which from Chatham would allow the chief in the station using binoculars to look out across the beach and out into the open ocean. He spotted 2 targets, and he spotted 2 different sections of the ship, and he thought that a land rescue was going to be possible. So he dispatched his crew at about 14:55. So just say 3 o'clock, roughly 3 o'clock. There was the possibility of a land rescue. But when they got there, the crew determined that the 2 sections of the hull were going to miss the land. They would not have been able to use breeches buoy or any other apparatus. So they returned to the station. Remember, there's a snowstorm going on. So they returned to the station, and now it's getting later in the day. It's about 5 o'clock now in the afternoon. That took a good chunk of the afternoon right there. And they're trying to determine what's going to happen next. So if we could go to next slide, we'll see a picture of the fish pier. And then you can see the Coast Guard Station Chatham. And I want you to focus upon those 2 points for just a moment. So it's now getting later in the day. By the time they determined who was going to go where, it's getting to be almost 6 o'clock. So 17:55 is the exact minute. So say 5 minutes to 6. They departed the Coast Guard station, and they're heading down to the fish pier. So they had to drive in the snowstorm from what you see, the Coast Guard station, up to the fish pier. And that's where the 36,500 was located. Of course, it wasn't just dockside. They had to row a dory offshore to get on board the 36,500 and then fire it up and move southward. Now, if you follow that track that is shown by a dark red line, you can see that it's progressing back and forth, and it's traveling southeast, and southwest, and southeast again. Somewhere along there, they had to cross the Chatham Bar, which was absolutely hazardous. Remember now, we're in the wooden boat now. So Bernie had to time it just right so that he could get enough water under him without scraping bottom. He's got a 3.5-foot draft, and he's got to have just enough water so they can push through. Well, in crossing the bar, he encountered one fierce wave that actually broke the windshield right in front of him, sending glass down and upon his face. So that's the first member who got injured. He had cuts on his face. With no glass to protect him, he's got wind blowing at him, salt air on his cuts. So Bernie's trying to get across the bar. He did get across the bar. But one of the problems with this particular engine that they had was that it had a carburetor. And the engine, by the way, for those who are interested in names and all, was a Stirling petrol 6-cylinder gasoline engine, had a carburetor, and the carbureted engine was problematic during the rescue. With the rolling of the 36-500, the carburetor float ran dry, and that caused the engine to stall. So Andy Fitzgerald, who was the engineman of the day, went down into the engine room, which is just a 3-step ladder to get down in there. Tight quarters. You wouldn't believe how tight it is. You have about 18 inches or so on one side. But by this point, the engine had been running, so the metal was hot. And with the rocking and rolling, he got thrown into the engine and sustained some bad burns. Not only that, he experienced electrical shock. So that's member number 2 that got injured. By the way, all 4 of the crewmen were injured in one way or another that day. I'll tell you more about that as we go, as time allows. So anyway, that first wave that took out the window and the windshield also took the compass off the stanchion. So now he's got no compass. Of course, he has no stars because of the ceiling, the low ceiling. So he only had one thing left to navigate by. And for those of you who are seamen, you know that the seas had been set up. They had been blowing from a northeast direction. So the waves were kind of headed all in the same direction. He could tell from the lay of the wave which way was north, which way was northeast, which way was west. He could find his direction based on that information. Bernie was experienced. He was a young guy. He was only in his low 20s. All of them were in their low 20s. But Bernie'd been on the water for 6 years. He was in Merchant Marine, and he was in Coast Guard after that. So he knew his way around. And besides that, he knew this vessel. And furthermore, he was used to taking this vessel, this wooden vessel, up alongside bigger vessels like the lightships. And that becomes very important as he goes into the stern section of the Pendleton once they finally get there, because the stern section was quite a bit larger than the 36-500. I don't know if I mentioned, but the tanker was originally 504 feet long. It didn't break in half. It wasn't like 250 and 250. It was more like 150 for the bow and like 350 for the stern section. Those are not accurate measures. Those are estimates only. So anyway, there was a good chunk of boat that Bernie had to come up alongside. And he, as I stated earlier, he was used to taking the small boat, the 36-500, up alongside a larger vessel. He had that experience. So Coast Guard record shows, remember he went out at 6 o'clock? He got there about 6:45. Technically, it was 1840. So the statement is CG36500 arrived stern section 1840. So he circled multiple times to get into position to rescue the crew from the Pendleton. But the currents and the wind were relentless. Now, here's the kid. He's wearing this life vest that is made out of kapok and canvas, not a waterproof device. It was so bulky, he was like the Michelin Man. He was just all bulked out. And he couldn't maneuver fast enough. So he took his life vest off, and he was lashed in. We had a line behind him going from one part of the cockpit to the other part. That's how he was held onto the boat with all of the rocking and rolling that was going on. Excuse me for 2 seconds. So he finally gets into position where he starts rescuing the people. The people are coming down the Jacob's ladder, but the problem was that the Pendleton was listing to port, and the Jacob's ladder wasn't just laying nicely. It wasn't just a ladder like you used to clean the gutters. It was just a dilapidated rope ladder that was moving in 3 directions at once. The seas were heaving. If you were on that Jacob's ladder, you would have had a ride that would have taken you up and down as much as 50 feet between the crest of the wave and the trough of the wave. Would have been about a 50-foot ride. It's like going up an elevator, 5 flights in seconds. So the men were rescued one by one. After they got about 20 on board, the crew was getting a little nervous, saying, this is getting dicey here. In fact, I wish we had this photo, but we don't. The bow section of the 36-500 has a scupper, and that scupper was underwater. There was so much weight forward in the survivors compartment. The crew was getting very nervous. And Bernie Weber said, they wanted to go back. They wanted to take them back to shore and come and get the others. Bernie said, no, we either all make it or we all perish. That's a direct quote. That's amazing. To me, that's amazing. So they finally do get all of the crew members down that they can. This one crew member who'd been up on board by the name of Tiny Myers. He was a big guy. Tiny was the nickname. He was one of the crew chefs. And he'd been up on deck outside, sounding the whistle, trying to get attention from those on shore. And as the day went by, remember the storm was still going on. Air temperature 35, 36, 38 maybe. It can snow at 36 if it's coming down hot enough. So the temperature couldn't have been much above that. I don't have the exact air temperature of that day. But the point is, Tiny had been outdoors for a number of hours and was beginning to suffer hypothermia. And as I've heard from medical staff who have come to the boat and offered their opinions, that the end stages of hypothermia are that you start to feel really hot. So he had been taking clothes off. He had stripped down and basically he was down just to his undershorts, but he had taken his t-shirt off. And that was a critical mistake because later, after he came down the Jacob's ladder, the crew had their hands on him, but because he was a big guy, he went into the water and there was nothing to grab onto. At least if they had a t-shirt, they could have put a pole on him or they could have gotten their hands on him somehow, but they had nothing to grab onto. One of the crewmen actually had his hands on him at the time when the 36-500 lurched forward and crushed Tiny between the 36-500 and the stern section of the Pendleton. And as I say, it crushed the hands of Irving Maskey. That's 3 injured players. The fourth player had been on deck on what I'll show you a little while from now is the well deck. And Bernie Weber in the coxswain station saw his crewman lift off the well deck, and then he heard a thump behind him. So the guy went over the Dodger and landed on the back of the 36-500. So as I stated, all 4 members did have some sort of an injury that night. All right, so not all, 32 out of 33 are aboard now, and they're making their way. And along the way, they turn on the radio, and there was a crew out at the McCullough, which was a rescue vessel that was attending to the Fort Mercer mishap. And they wanted Bernie Weber to take the crew, the surviving members of the Pendleton, out to sea, drive out to sea, and make a second trip from the 36-500 onto the McCullough. So Bernie said, there's no way we're going out to sea with this crew. So he turned his radio off, and he headed the boat west. All Bernie Weber wanted to do at that point was to beach the boat. He said he was going to run it aground and hold it hard so that people could get onto land and then they'd be rescued on land. But what happened was he actually came upon the red light of Old Harbor. He had found his way back to the harbor. So they worked their way up to the fish pier, and they arrive at the fish pier at 2050, 2100, 9 o'clock. And there they were greeted by townspeople, and that's pretty much the story. Jeremy, if you could go forward, I want to show the people just a couple of photos of the boat. If you could go to the survivors compartment. Oh, here we are, the fish pier. The fish pier is shown here, and as you look, you can see the 36-500. There are 2 vessels off to the side there. And if you look, it's the boat on the right. That's the 36-500. That is the 36-500. You can see that it's offshore. In order to get to that, they would have to have rowed a dory. Now, remember, in February, around here in New England, at 5 o'clock at night, it's pitch dark. So they're rowing in a storm, in a snowstorm, with seas. I don't know what the seas were in the harbor there, but they had to row that dory out to the 36500. Next slide. So on the right-hand side, you can see the current engine room. This is not the Stirling petrol engine that I described earlier. That was what was aboard the night on February 18th. This one's a Detroit, and the Detroit engine is a 471. Again, there's not much space when you walk around it. Probably 18 to 20 inches on that side that's closest on the right, and then even fewer inches are up at the bow section, and still a smaller amount over on the port side. It's extremely loud also, that engine. About 95 horsepower. It gets the job done. If you can hang on, this vessel would get to you, but it was a slow boat. But it's got a low center of gravity. And because of the three sections of air, the survivor's compartment, the engine room, which is virtually airtight, there are some valves to allow some air in just for ventilation and combustion. And then there's a third section in the stern called the lazarette, which is a storage area, basically airtight as well. Because of the airtight compartments topside and the low center of gravity, this boat is very stable. It's got a 2,000-pound bronze steel. The whole thing weighs over 20,000 pounds. So it's really stable. But if it were to go past the point of no return, it would roll, and it would come back up in a matter of seconds. That did not happen on the night of February 18th. But out of the 135 vessels, of the 135 36-footers, some of them did roll. All right, next slide, please.
Excuse me, John, but do we want to look at the little video clip here with the...
Yes, please. Yes, please.
Okay, here we go.
So now we're going to open up, or we have opened up the engine room door. This, by the way, this door is original. You can see that it's riveted in the corners. That's why it's still here. I do believe that this door came from the motor lifeboat 36501, and when it was in New Bedford at the DPW garage outdoors. I think some people took advantage of the boat being there unattached, unlooked after. But these are original doors and the fittings and all that stuff. This is a Detroit diesel built in 1948. It's not the original motor. It was put in after the rescue because it's diesel and it's fuel injected. It runs really well. And on the bulkhead is a bilge pump, a hand bilge pump with two pipes, one going to the engine room compartment and one going to the center compartment. Since we got this close, we might as well start up the engine. I'm going to show you how this Morse control, it functions as a starter as well. Looking at the gratings, I think they're original. This, by the way, the engine in the rescue was a gasoline engine, physically about the same size, but carbureted instead of diesel fuel injected.
Is there more to come from Richard?
There is, but we have it separated to different clips. So this is actually a video clip on the compass. Do you want to go ahead and play it, or do you want to say something first?
Yes, I just want to introduce the speaker. His name is Richard Ryder. He's a former coxswain. Please play it.
Sure.
Now we're looking at the compass. Now during the rescue, the compass was a little different configuration, but it's set on this square block, and it was designed to be removed easily in case they wanted to store it or keep it from being stolen. and it was displaced somehow and went due to the sea, and found its way down underneath the side deck, either on this side or the other one. And of course, it was dark. Bernie didn't know where it was. He had his hands full anyway. So in the movie, Chris Pine says, "The compass is gone." Well, it was, but it didn't necessarily go overboard.
Okay, thanks to Richard Ryder for that commentary. So here now we can see a couple of photos from archived newspapers, as it says, bow section of the Pendleton, the day after. And just advance to the next slide. And we can see additional, there were a number of newspapers, some from Boston, and as you see now, some from New Bedford. This is just a surface covering of some of the articles that are available. If you go to the Orleans Historical Society's website, what you do is you go to the 36, when you go to the website, you go to 36500, and then you go to the rescue. And then when you are at the rescue, you can scroll down and see some newspaper articles. And not only are there photographs, but there are full stories. So next slide, please. The survivor's compartment. I wonder if we could just look at the lower right-hand corner, the survivor's compartment. We don't know how many people were inside, but out of 32 survivors, we like to play with the numbers. We say 18. If there were 18 inside, you could imagine 6 on one rack and 6 on another, and maybe 3 on the floor and 3 up front toward the bow. So if you put 18 in there, that still leaves 14 to be elsewhere. And don't forget, you have a crew of 4 as well. So some of those members, including this person by the name of Ray Steele, did not go into the survivor's compartment. Look at the photo that is in the top right-hand side. You'll see white and kind of a buff color. And this is called the well deck. That's a current day photograph within the last year or two. The well deck has 8 scuppers, 4 on each side. The boat is a wet boat. Even when the seas are 1 to 2 feet and you're running at 6 knots or 8. Usually we don't run it at 8 knots or 9 knots too often or for too long. But even when you're running at a fairly slow speed in calm seas, you get water on that well deck. And if there were waves that were going to splash over and wash over the well deck, if you were standing knee deep in water on the well deck, that water would drain out in a number of seconds because there are the scuppers. The scuppers are about 6 inches long and about 2 inches high. So those 12 square inches times 8 gives you a drainage, pretty good drainage. So next slide.
We actually have a short clip with Dick Ryder again about the survivor's compartment.
Perfect.
Okay.
People want to know how many could fit in here. Well, I've had 12 men in here, but they didn't have life jackets on, so I'm going to say you could put 11 in there. And we're going to zoom in a little bit here. If I'm getting used to this thing. That is an air chamber, and you can access it, but there's nothing underneath that bronze thing except air. In this part of the boat, there is a bilge pump down underneath the deck here. There's also a high water alarm that operates on a float switch. They both operate on float switches. So if the boat starts to take on water and somebody can hear the alarm, they'll know that something's amiss. Bernie Weber told me that when they went on trips sometimes, or if they went to a light ship, they would take a rest or a nap or sleep, but not really well, but sleep on either side of this compartment.
And here's a photo of them coming into the fish pier. If you look at the vessel, look at the bow section of the vessel, you might be able to see 4 crewmen, or excuse me, 4 people. 3 of them are crewmen, and one of them is wearing a long black raincoat, and that gentleman's name is Ray Steele. So he was a survivor. We've heard from a survivor's child about that story concerning his long black raincoat that he grabbed when he ran topside. So just a little story about the actual survivors from survivors' children. The people you see on the lower right-hand corner are townspeople, and they were made aware of the mishaps going on offshore. There was a town meeting that night, and apparently they closed the town meeting or adjourned the town meeting, and some of the people came out and assisted. They were taking people to hospitals, local hospitals, in station wagons, and there were not as many ambulances back in the day as are available today. And doctors were attending as best they could. There was tremendous help from the local community to house and to clothe the members who were taken ashore that night. One little detail that I didn't mention was about the engine room. The engine room would have been a welcome refuge for those members who did get wet. Bernie stated that the engine room was housing a number of the Pendleton crew. So if you look at the helm area, which is, say, upper right, you can see the Dodger, which is like an awning over the helm. You might be able to see some faces in there. That's how you would have exited from the engine room. So there are faces if you look close enough there. So people in the survivors compartment, some people in the well deck, some people in the engine room. No one during the ride back in was likely to have been riding on top of what we call the turtlebacks. So if you look now, you can see 3 of the members on the boat there on the turtleback. No one would have been able to ride there because of the pitching and rolling of the seas, pitching and rolling of the boat. So in Disney, they made it happen. In real life, it never happened. So ladies and gentlemen, I invite you to get out there and do the research. It's a great story. I've just touched the top. But I want to go back to something that Julianne said. There's an energy in that boat. There's something there. And we tell that story. It's a story of courage. 4 guys went out, young guys, and they did their job. So I invite you to come and see it. The boat's going to be available after Memorial Day 2025. It would be there Saturdays and Sundays, 1 to 4, giving tours free of charge. And then if you'd like to go for a ride, you can talk to Jay or myself, and we can get you aboard. So thank you for your attention. I really appreciate the 121 of you coming out tonight. Thank you. This is a picture of the crew. On the left, going left to right, is Bernie and Randy Fitzgerald, that's the engineman, Richard Levacy, and Irving Maskey. Irving Maskey wasn't even assigned to the Coast Guard Station Chatham. He was assigned to one of the lightships. He was coming in to try to get a transient ride back over to one of the lightships, but the seas were too great. Then when the whole episode occurred and staff members were not available, he said that he would go. So he was just like Johnny on the spot. And then there's a nice picture of the gentleman 50 years later. And here they are, still in the same relative locations. And that's the crew. They all received the Gold Life-Saving Medal from the Treasury Department. The government wanted to give Bernie, excuse me for 1 second. Pardon me. The government wanted to give Bernie a Gold Life-Saving Medal, and he basically said, unless all 4 of us get that life-saving medal, he wouldn't walk across the stage. So they all got the Gold Life-Saving Medal, well-deserved. So thank you for listening, folks. I'm going to turn it over to Jay Stradal, and he's going to tell you the story of the rest of the story.
Thanks, Johnny, and hi, everyone. It's kind of a hard thing to follow Johnny's narration there with the drama. But I'd like to focus a little bit on today and the future as far as the boat is concerned. And a way to start that is by introducing you to the Coast Guard cutter Bernard C. Weber that was commissioned in April of 2012. It's a first of its Sentinel class, what they call a fast response cutter. That's a class WPC 1101. And this boat was commissioned 3 years after Bernie's death, unfortunately, but his wife and his daughter were able to attend. It was built in the Bollinger shipyards in Louisiana, which is just outside of New Orleans. And it's, as I said, the first of several in this class that are being built or scheduled to be built. So if you go to the next slide, please, Jeremy. This is what the 36500 looks like today. And it's really fully restored and operational. It's one of just a handful in the country that's still running today. It is on the National Register of Historic Places, which brings it in the same company as the USS Constitution in Boston and the battleship USS Massachusetts in Fall River, Massachusetts. I know some people are into statistics, so let me cite just a few things. Johnny mentioned some of them, but the 36500 was built in 1946 at Curtis Bay Yard in Maryland. There are 135 boats of this class built between 1937 and 1956. It was the last wooden-hulled coastal lifeboat design the Coast Guard built. The cost in 1945 dollars was $18,912. Hull displacement was around 20,000 pounds. Cruise radius is 280 miles at about 8 knots. Length overall is 36 foot 8 inches, and beam is roughly 10 feet 8 inches. And draft is 3.4 inches. It's predominantly made of cypress planks with some oak. That's pre-World War II. Models after the war were slightly different woods, but they were all wood. And as mentioned before, it was a Stirling petrol gasoline engine originally installed, and then it was replaced after the rescue by a Detroit diesel engine. And as Johnny said, if it were to flip, it would self-right in 7.2 seconds, and it would be self-bailing in roughly 24 or 25 seconds. Now, the boat did not look like this when it came to the Historical Society in 1981. It's really a rescue story in itself. So, Jeremy, if you go to the next slide. So give you an idea of what it looked like. A little bit of history here is that the boat was decommissioned in 1968 and it was transferred to the U.S. Park Service, the Cape Cod National Seashore, as many of you know, from a government transfer, obviously, to one agency to another, with the hope that the 36500 be put on display at the seashore. But unfortunately, no funds ever came for that display, and the boat sat fully exposed out in the weather for 13 years behind the shack of the harbor master or the park ranger. So in 1981, it was acquired by the Orleans Historical Society, and with the help of the Coast Guard. The government would not obviously transfer a boat to a private entity. It had to be a nonprofit organization. It was offered to Chatham, but it was declined, and the Orleans Society gratefully accepted it. Immediately, you can see by the left picture, lower left, and also on the lower right, it was in terrible shape after those 13 years in the weather. And so a major restoration effort began almost immediately after it came into our possession. And it was mostly done by volunteers and off-duty Coast Guard personnel. There have been several other major restorations since then, but today, as I said, it's fully functioning and operational. And, it serves as a floating museum. And yes, society members and guests can take a short cruise on it, about an hour long or so. And that's, of course, dependent upon weather and tides. The boat is viewed by thousands of people every year. We know that, even though in a public space we can't do an exact head count. But we just know after 42 years of being its caretaker that there's that many people that see it from all over the world. I want to give you an idea in the next picture of why the boat really matters. Why are we going through all this trouble of preserving this boat? And what you're going to see is a summary of an event we held in 2022, the 70th anniversary of the actual rescue. I might add that the day started appropriately with a nor'easter. Trees were down all over the Cape, power was out, but fortunately by early and mid-afternoon, the weather lifted and we were able to go ahead with the ceremony. So Jeremy, if you'd play that, please.
Sure. So this is just a few minutes, this video clip.
Thanks, Jeremy. I'd like to spend just a couple of quick minutes telling you a little bit about the show itself and the Orleans Historical Society. You can see the building at the upper portion of the screen is our meeting house, which is also on the National Register of Historic Places. It was built in 1834, and that serves as our primary museum and event space. And one of the assets we have aside from the meeting house, there's a second building that's a Heard Chapel, which is also a historic building, and then the 36500. As I said earlier, we've been honored as the caretaker of the boat for 40 some odd years now. And, as a wooden boat, it has to stay in the water to keep its hull wet and watertight. And of course, that has its challenges. It's constantly exposed to the weather. We've been thinking for a number of years now that the time is coming where it has to come out of the water and be better preserved inside in its own building. And that's our plan going forward. We want to better protect the boat and preserve it for generations to come. We want to make the boat and its story accessible year-round, whereas right now at Rock Harbor, it's only available in the summer for viewing. In the winter, it's at a private marina where people can't visit it that easily. We also want to exhibit the 400-year history of life-saving on the Outer Cape, which is rather unique. It started with the rescue of survivors of the Sparrowhawk in 1626. And William Bradford, who was governor of the Plymouth colony at that point, actually led a rescue party to bring the survivors of that shipwreck back to Plymouth. So that was the first recorded shipwreck in the New World. And of course, since then, we've had different organizations culminating with the Coast Guard today that have been saving lives on the Outer Cape for, as I say, 400 years. So we want to honor them in this new building. Next, please, Jeremy. This is a drawing of the building we're going to build. To the right, it's actually an addition to the Heard Chapel, a current building on our property. You can see then there's a glass separator and then the boathouse addition. And I might note that some of the features of that boathouse, like the watchtower on top, the window pattern over the doorway, and some of the shingling that you can't see very easily in this picture, are reminiscent of a Coast Guard station, the Red House station that once stood on Orleans Beach from about 1875 until 1932-33. In fact, that watchtower of the original Red House was fired upon by a German submarine during World War I, while it was in the process of trying to sink several barges and a tugboat just off the beach here in Orleans. Just as a very quick aside, Orleans, as small as we are, community of roughly 5,500 people, which swells much larger in the summer, obviously. But we have the distinct or dubious distinction, if you will, of being the only town or city in the country that has been attacked twice by foreign powers during two different wars. One was the World War II submarine attack I just mentioned, but we were also attacked in 1814 during the War of 1812 by the British, and we repelled them, I might add. So we are defiant and self-reliant, as the town motto talks about. So Jeremy, go back to the next one, please. Let's take a look inside very quickly. The space on the right is the Heard Chapel. You enter from the top of your screen through the entrance doors and into a reception area that then forms a balcony curving around the boat. And you can actually see within the museum the boat from 4 different levels. And I'll talk about those. I think they're more readily seen in the next slide, Jeremy. There you go. There's a pier level, so you're looking slightly down upon it. There's also the deck level. Then there's a water level, and then there's the keel level down below that. So you can see the bronze keel and the Monel plating that was put on the 36500 and a few of her sister boats, so that they could be icebreakers in the wintertime in the harbor. Protects the wooden hull. Next, please, Jeremy. This is what the inside will look like, we hope, as our plans unfold. You can see there's a mural to the left of the boat of the stern of the Pendleton with a Jacob's ladder hanging down to give visitors an idea of the proportion of scale with a huge stern of the Pendleton versus the tiny little 36500. And then you can see there's different displays and exhibit areas around the boat. You might be able to see on the floor of the main floor a map embedded in the concrete of Cape Cod that will show one of the pictures that Johnny showed earlier, where the ships broke apart and then where the rescues were conducted. So you can stand on the floor and get a sense of the scope of that. Next, please. That's pretty much it. I might add that there will be an audio track we plan in the museum as well that will play the sounds of howling wind, of course, crashing waves. And, Bernie talked about hearing the twisted steel of the stern of the Pendleton as he was approaching it. He actually heard it before he could see it in the dark. And so that'll give people a full sensory idea of what it must have been like during that rescue out on that water. So I invite you, as Johnny has already mentioned, to do a little more research if you are interested. You can go to our website, which is orleanshistoricalsociety.org. And there's all sorts of places with additional videos, pictures, all sorts of different information there for you. And of course, if you would like to donate, we haven't officially started our campaign yet, but will in the next couple of months. But we would certainly greatly accept a donation if you'd like to help us out. And the website will tell you how to do that. So with that, I'll turn it back to you, Jeremy.
Thank you, Jay. So I've just come out of screen sharing. Thank you, Jay and Johnny, both for that great presentation. I'm sure everybody enjoyed it. So we have a number of questions and comments in the chat. So why don't I quickly go through those. First, Richard Hoyt posted a message. He is the owner, one of the owners of the Stage Harbor Lighthouse in Chatham, which I know you're very familiar with, as I am. I once walked out on the beach, Harding's Beach there, to get a good view of it. He said, enjoying the ride you're giving us today for going over an amazing moment in these waters. Thanks. And then Laura Eldridge, or Lincoln Eldridge, Cape Codder and retired Coast Guard, 22 years, stationed at Provincetown for a few years, and was coxswain of the 44-foot motor lifeboat that was there at the time. Very familiar with seeing the Pendleton while boating growing up. Amazing boat and amazing boat handling. Thank you for saving her. Douglas asked, does anyone know, or is there a wood model kit of the 36500?
Yes, there is.
Johnny?
No, this is Tim Dring. I can tell you there is.
Okay.
Yeah. If you Google it, you can pull it up and you can order it. It's one that can be motorized.
Excellent. Jay and Johnny, are you familiar with that?
Yes, I am. It's quite an extensive model. If it's the one I'm thinking of, it's roughly about 3 feet long. So it's good size.
That's correct. And then there's a plastic one that's 1/48 scale by Glencoe, and it's not produced anymore, but there are plenty of kits available on eBay, maybe even Amazon. You can, so that one's a smaller one, about 12 inches long.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Thank you, Tim. Let's see here. Matt asks, how late in this year/season will the boat be available to view?
Roughly Columbus Day weekend.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And sorry, I just skipped a few by accident. Mark asks, how could the Pendleton float after a broken half? That's an interesting question.
I again, I can answer that. A lot of the cargo tanks still remained intact after the ship broke apart, and so they were able to stay airtight and watertight, and that provided sufficient buoyancy to keep both halves afloat. But if you notice in the photographs, they are listing, so there are flooded sections of each of the two halves, and so it wasn't totally level. One of the fallacies of the Disney version is that it shows the stern section sinking, which it did not. It ran aground off of Monomoy Island and stayed aground for quite a few years until it was dynamited apart to remove it as a hazard to navigation.
Thank you, Tim. You're obviously very knowledgeable. Could you tell us who you are?
Yeah, I'm I belong to the Lighthouse Society. I'm also with the U.S. Life-Saving Service Heritage Association, and I have been assisting various people, both at the Orleans Historical Society as well as Chatham, with the 36500 for quite a few years. I was involved with two of its restorations. I provided the original blueprints for the 36500, which I have, as well as all the specifications. And I've been a volunteer historian for the U.S. Coast Guard for about 20 years. And so I've ridden on the 36500. I'm very good friends with Richard Ryder. He's an old friend of mine. And I actually had the honor of meeting Andy Fitzgerald during the memorial service that was given for Bernie after he died. And what was really nice was the current commandant at the time, Thad Allen, flew up from Washington, D.C. specifically for that, as well as for the retirement ceremony of the last operating 44-foot motor lifeboat, 44301, which is now on the front lawn of the Chatham station. So.
Okay, great, Tim. Thank you so much for taking part in this and for sharing those.
No problem.
Comments. Very much appreciate it. The next comment in the chat was by my friend Dan May, retired Coast Guard Rear Admiral, who was kind of answering that previous question as you did, Tim, but Dan said air was trapped in the hull, even though broken in half, which provided buoyancy. But Dan, you actually emailed me today also, and I don't know if you want to unmute yourself and maybe say something about you actually have a personal association with Bernie Weber.
Yeah, no, first of all, Johnny and Jay, great presentation. Thank you so much. And Tim, thanks for your commentary as well. No, I had the distinct honor and privilege to know Bernie Weber and call him a shipmate and a friend. He's an amazing guy, very humble. If there's anything I could add to what's already been talked about tonight, Bernie did not want to be recognized. He was adamant that if he was going to be recognized, it would be the entire crew. Everyone, all four of them had to receive the medal. He also was torn. I talked with him quite a bit, and he really wrestled with the fact that the gentleman affectionately known as Tiny, who did not survive, the number 33, that always ate away at Bernie and bothered him that they were not able to rescue him. But one of the neat thing in the background behind me is actually in my Coast Guard days driving the 36500. It was a nice day in Cape Cod Bay, a little snotty out. We took some water over the bow, nothing like Bernie did, but It was truly an honor to drive the 36-500. But one of the things I was able to also do um, later in my career, I came back to the Coast Guard Academy 27 years after I graduated and was the assistant superintendent there. And Bernie was splitting his time between Massachusetts and Florida at the time. And I asked Bernie if he would come down to the academy and talk to the cadets, give them some inspiration and tell his story. He was very reluctant to do so, but I worked on him, and Bernie said, yeah, I got to do it. And it was an amazing day. We did record it. Somewhere I've got that recording, but Bernie came down and he told his story. And Johnny did a great job tonight, but when you hear it from Bernie himself, it just mesmerizes you as he tells you what he was doing, what was going through his mind, what his fears, what his true feelings were at the time. But no, an amazing guy, an amazing story. So honored, so privileged to have been involved in it somewhat and hear it directly from Bernie. And thanks to all the folks out there that are continuing to keep the story going, continuing to restore the 36-500 and keep that part of history alive. Thank you so much for doing that.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you so much for taking. I'm so happy you're able to take part in this event. And boy, if you find that recording, I'm sure Jay and Johnny and a lot of other people, and including me, would love to hear.
Yeah, no, the Academy, that was one of the things I asked the public affairs, and I'll have to dig through. You know me, Jeremy. I've got much like you, about 57 boxes of Coast Guard, Lighthouse, you name it, stuff.
Yeah.
And that recording is there. I dug it out not too long ago. Someone else was interested in it, and we dug it out. But yeah, no, quite an amazing story.
Yeah. Well, that must have been a great day for everybody, the cadets and everybody that day. So in the chat, Douglas was asking about the model also, but I think we already answered that. Lawrence asks, will the Zoom recording be made available for later viewing? Yes, it will be. It'll be on the US LHS YouTube channel. I'm hoping I can get it on by tomorrow, but don't hold me to that. It'll be in the next couple of days, but I think probably tomorrow, certainly this week. Well, Dan, you just also mentioned that Glencoe Models makes a plastic 1/48 scale model of the 36-500, probably some
Yes,
kids
yeah,
build on
Tim
eBay.
mentioned that as well.
Mm-hmm.
I actually bought that model years and years ago and built it, and it's somewhere in my Coast Guard stuff as well. But I'm sure, as Tim mentioned, there's probably a few of those still out there. And it's kind of a nice rendering of the 36-500.
Mm-hmm. The next two questions may have kind of been covered, but the one is, did the Pendleton run aground like shallow water? And the next question was, what was the Pendleton's destination? That's a interesting question. So Johnny or Jay, I don't know if you want to address those.
The Pendleton was heading to Boston.
Mm-hmm.
The Fort Mercer was heading up to Portland, Maine. That's why she was farther out to sea in the Gulf of Maine. But the Pendleton itself was running into Boston.
Yeah.
She wasn't reported overdue until the late afternoon. The pilot came down, and at first he said the paint schemes don't match the Fort Mercer. And then eventually he came down a little lower and saw the word Pendleton. Then it was reported to Coast Guard, and when it went to district, that's when the ship was reported overdue. The district had no idea that she was missing until that time.
Yeah. As far as physically what happened and caused it to break in two, could you kind of reiterate that a little bit?
The steel came apart. The steel broke apart because it was brittle, and it was brittle because of the initial construction.
Okay. A lot of people thanking you for a great presentation.
Thank you.
fantastic. What some people will do, what some people care about. Congratulations, Orleans Historical Society. Somebody else asking about the recording also, again, on USLHS YouTube channel within a day or two. Have there been any Zooms on the lightships? We have not. I don't think we have. I don't think we've done any of these events specifically on lightships. I've done episodes of the podcast related to lightships, but we should do a lightship Zoom event. So I will file that in my my future events category in my brain, if I can find room for it in there. Carol Blake asks, Dan, if you find the recording before Sunday, could you bring it to the NEL meeting, the New England Lighthouse Lovers? I guess, you already answered that, Dan, via chat.
I'll look for it.
Okay, great. Judith asks what boat is used for the boat rides, but that is the 36500 you were talking about, of course. Enjoy the podcast immensely, guys. Thank you so much. So I'm not seeing any other questions. Judy Ann, you're probably looking at this too, or Jay and Johnny. If I missed anything, let me know.
No, I think you cover them all, Jeremy.
Yeah. Okay. Well, this is fantastic. And again, thank you so much. But I want to give you all a chance to add anything else maybe you haven't had a chance to say. So if any of you want to jump in, please do. Or if not, that's okay too.
I'm just glad this turned into the Zoom presentation. I'm just so excited. Little did I know last August that it would turn into this. So I'm thrilled. Thank you, guys. You did a fantastic job.
Thank
and
you.
Again, Judy Ann, thank you. You got the ball rolling in this, but also the presentation people just saw, the PowerPoint you put together, basically put it together. It's gone through, a lot of
Changes,
evolution,
yeah.
but you had a lot to do with how that was put together. So thank you for all the work you did on this.
My
Hey, Jeremy,
pleasure.
I'd like to add a sort of a closing humorous story, if I may, just briefly.
Sure.
Some people ask us at Rock Harbor, was the 36500 actually in the Disney movie? The answer is no, it was not. We were approached by Disney and asked if we would allow that to happen. And number one is they wanted to commandeer the boat from us, which we didn't get excited about. But more importantly was they thought it looked too pristine for the movie, and they wanted to rough it up a little bit.
Okay.
So, needless to say, after going through all that restoration and all that volunteer work, we were not going to rough up the 36500. So I'll end with that funny story.
Okay, thanks. I just want to mention, I saw the movie in a theater and it was worth seeing. It was entertaining, but I realized I had read The Finest Hours and I knew a lot was changed. And one of the things that changed was that in the movie, Bernie's wife is a major character, and it's like she keeps going to the Coast Guard station and asking, "What's going on? Tell me what's happening." And the actress was good, and it kind of, I guess, it made things they thought more interesting. But in real life, I believe Bernie's wife was home in bed sick, if I remember correctly.
That is correct.
Yep, they were already married, and she was homesick.
Oh, that's right. She was just his girlfriend on the movie.
Right, right. And he was more worried about her being sick in bed than she knew about him out on the rescue until the following day.
Yeah. So Johnny, I don't know if you have any final words for everybody.
No, it's just a pleasure to have been present, to retell the story, to keep the story alive. It's my pleasure. And I'm one of a host of docents, and we all feel the same way about that. The story needs to continue. And I thank you for this opportunity. I thank you, Jeremy, and Judy Ann, for your technical expertise in putting this together. And Jay, I think your information was fabulous as well. So I'm well pleased with tonight, and I'm very thankful to have had the opportunity to be here.
And thank you. Thank you, Johnny.
Thank you, both of you and the Historical Society, for all you're doing to keep this history alive, and the boat obviously alive as well. It's all tied in together, and you're just doing a wonderful service for everybody who cares about these things. So we'll sign off in just a moment. I just want to say that everybody, a lot of you are members of the U.S. Lighthouse Society. If you're not, I certainly invite you to become members. We would love that. Go to uslhs.org, learn about all the things the Society does, including tours all over the world. I'm actually going on the France tour in June, which is pretty exciting. My niece Tina and I will be running a tour on Cape Cod in September. It was full, but a couple of people dropped out, so there is room on that. All the tours are described on the website. They're usually a week or more long. And the podcast, Lighthearted, you can get it through any podcast app or on the front page of the U.S. Lighthouse Society website, uslhs.org. I've got a lot of exciting podcast episodes coming up the next few weeks, trying to put together everything to carry me through the month I'll be in France. So I'm busy putting those together too. So we'll be back with more of these Zoom events. I think the next one will probably be in a couple of months, so watch for notices about that. So we really appreciate all of you taking part in this. And again, Jay and Johnny and Judy Ann and everybody else, Tim and Dan and everybody who took part. We really appreciate it. So we'll see you again, and just everybody have a great night and keep a good light. Thank you.
Thanks,
Good night.
Jeremy.
Good night, everybody.